Welcome everyone to the weekly crypto news recap, where we go over all of the latest news in crypto from the week, go through it, let you know what's been important happening in the blockchain space throughout the week. And as always, I want to welcome to the show Chris Karabats from SmartCash. Welcome.
Hey Naomi, how's it going this week?
Pretty good, pretty good. As always, lots to cover. So we sort of seen a bit of the aftermath of all of the crazy news that happened last week with the hodlernaut stuff. So we'll go into a little bit of that. But right off the bat, I want to give a huge shout out. I don't do this often enough, but I want to give a huge shout out to all of my Bitbacker supporters. So anyone who is on there, like liking posts or engaging there or sending power chats or discovering other people on the platform, I just want to give a hat tip to all of you and a huge thank you. I really appreciate you being involved there, and also a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters as well. So just wanted to start off by a little bit of gratitude today. So let's go into some of the news today. I do want to start off by talking about Kraken. So Chris, we talked in the last show, we were talking about all of the craziness that happened with the Craig Wright lawsuits, and then CZ saying, oh, he's going to delist from Binance, and he finally follows through, and it was much quicker than anyone could have expected. Shapeshift immediately follows suit. Then Kraken, we weren't sure during the last weekly recap whether they were going to, but they did put out a poll asking whether they should or not, and then it came back. They said, listen, we polled 70,000 people in our community. These were the results, so we've decided to delist as well. And a whole bunch of other exchanges also followed. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, Kraken themselves, they were already predisposed to not like BSV, so it's not surprising.
Why? Because they believe in like freedom of speech and not using the power of the state to hurt people or something like that?
Well, I mean, I have all the respect for Jesse. He does espouse those views, but also it's because a group related to SV sued Kraken and Jesse back in November during the fork because they were supporting Bitcoin Cash. So it's not necessarily as idealistic as we would like it because, you know, when somebody sues you or when a group associated with a group sues you, you are already predisposed to not like them. So they were very ready to jump on this and jump all over this and delist them. And their poll itself was very interesting. I mean, it got over 70,000 votes. Now, I thought their announcement was a bit disingenuous because 70,000 people voting on their Twitter poll is not really 70,000 Kraken users.
Yeah, I saw that when they said we polled 70,000 of our users and these were the results. It's like, well, it should have said we polled 70,000 Twitter trolls and this is a very credible result. And actually that kind of leads me into this this next bit I wanted to talk about, and we'll go back to Kraken as well with all of this. But BidforX put out a statement where they're talking about the movement #delist BSV, and they said that they are not going to go ahead and delist them, and that they had also put out a poll, but then they decided, you know, especially due to how polls could so easily be rigged on Twitter, and, you know, malicious activity associated with the poll, they've decided not to delist. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Correct. They decided that they weren't going to follow the Twitter poll because, probably for what I just mentioned, it's really probably not all their users voting on it. But basically, they want their view is of a crypto space that you can disagree but still trade. They don't necessarily feel the need to see eye to eye with everybody in the crypto space to actually list them. And I respect that viewpoint that they have there. I mean, I understand we all don't like Craig and his claim to be Satoshi and his claim that his coin is Satoshi's vision, but at times being able to disagree and keep moving on, that's laudable. That's admirable. So I thought that was, you know, it's not a bad way to move forward. And in the end, it may actually be a healthier way to move forward than some of the knee-jerk responses that a couple of the other exchanges jumped on.
Right. And I mean, I'm not sure I would call it knee-jerk because I think everyone was just kind of waiting for something like this, you know? I think that everyone was just like, hunched there and in anticipation. Like, they know it's going to blow up. They know that something's going to go crazy because there's just been warring all over the place. And finally, it took someone with as much prominence as CZ to say, hey, we're going to take this off Binance, and all these other places were just like, yeah, you know, this is the trigger. And it really did start this movement. And I understand why other people are pushing back as well, like when you don't want to hurt the users of a coin just because there's an asshole guy at the center of it, you know, doing some dodgy things. It shouldn't necessarily be that related to the users. But I also understand why people don't want it listed on their exchange, and you kind of want to disassociate from that sort of toxicity.
I can't disagree with that. I mean, I would personally have a hard time working with Craig or working with his product, but you know, I respect both sides here. I hate sounding so wishy-washy or whatever that way.
We're so diplomatic, Chris. Like, I understand both sides of the story. Well done, crypto. Oh, dear.
I mean, yeah. I mean, at this time, I mean, you know, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if BSV shows back up on, you know, Binance at some point, or Kraken at some point, especially if...
Now, why? What makes you think that, and in what time frame are you thinking?
I'm not talking next week, but I could see, you know, in a few months or next year, especially if, you know, BSV continues hanging around that long and staying with such a high market cap. I mean, their users on BSV will demand that they relist it, and they will go to other exchanges. Like, you know, OKX is partnering with BSV to launch a BSV-backed exchange. And, you know, OKX has, you know, theoretically more volume than Binance does. However you trust those volume numbers, I don't know. And, you know, I mean, BidforX isn't a top 10 exchange. So these are big exchanges that will continue trading BSV. And at some point, you know, I fully expect CZ to say, to not want to leave that money on the table.
Yeah. No, that makes sense from a financial standpoint. I guess we'll have to see what happens with BSV in the meantime. Maybe it's something that just doesn't last, and then it's really not in their financial interest to maintain the compatibility and have BSV on there. But we'll have to see what happens there. I want to move on. I want to talk about Rakuten, which is an e-commerce giant in Japan. It's sort of like Japan's answer to Amazon. And so they started accepting account registrations for its new exchange, its cryptocurrency exchange, the Rakuten wallet. And this was previously under a different name. It was previously called Everybody's Bitcoin. And then recently they acquired millions of dollars. They went through a rebranding, and it's interesting that, you know, something as prominent as Rakuten is kind of going into the crypto space.
I mean, I can only imagine what would happen if Amazon started crypto trading.
I know, it like gives us a hint, doesn't it? It's like, you know, and ever since Overstock accepted Bitcoin payments back in, gosh, was it 2014 that happened? And that was just huge. And everyone at the time was like, ooh, next it's Amazon. And that never happened. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I can see Amazon looking into crypto payments the same way that Facebook is, and maybe having their own internal coin as a way of saving costs. But I actually don't ever see them going into the field of crypto in general or accepting Bitcoin donations. I mean, I think that they may be like the last adopters of something like that.
Yeah, I don't think they would jump feet first into that at all. They have lots of reasons to stay attached to the current system. So I don't see Amazon following suit anytime soon until it became very ubiquitous. And, you know, one of the things about Rakuten is, you know, they are in Japan. They do have to get a license to do this, and they did receive that license a month ago to do this. So they're moving pretty fast here, and they're pretty excited. So I can't wait to see what comes of this in Japan, because they're pretty big in Japan. I don't know exactly their size, but they do good business. And this will really open up trading to a lot more Japanese citizens than otherwise would have wanted to deal with some of the other exchanges. This will likely make it quite user-friendly for people.
And I just wanted to let people know I'm also trying to stream on DLive. Not sure if it's working. My screen apparently looks blank from my end, so let me know if that's going through. But last week we did cover the news that PewDiePie had moved over exclusively to stream on DLive, which is very interesting, and we talked a little bit about that. So we're also following that and keeping you updated on the progress. He gave like $50,000 to different DLive users in the stream as sort of a promotion, a kickoff of saying like, hey, I'm on here now. And so that was very interesting. But I just wanted to point that out to everyone, and I'm going to be keeping you updated on there. Okay, so people say that there's no picture and no sound on there. So so apparently I'm not streaming on DLive at all at the moment. So I'll see if I can work on that during the stream, but I don't know. I don't like our chances. So let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about Coinbase and proof of stake. And we had mentioned before that they've started going into the staking world. They just dealing with institutional investors, are helping those people stake in things like Tezos, Maker, Cosmos. And this is a really interesting turn of events. So let's talk a bit about this.
Well, Coinbase did, as we said, a couple of weeks ago, they started saying they were going to stake tokens for Tezos, and apparently they're expanding that to some other proof of stake tokens. And that's a really big deal, because these institutional investors will buy quite a bit, and a lot of the involvement, the user involvement in the votes in these communities is quite low. Like the recent EOS vote about its new constitution was well under 5% of its tokens voting in that. And Tezos was relatively low for its last one. The recent Maker vote was only 10%. So yeah, so if institutional people are holding these tokens inside Coinbase, there's no real mechanism to vote. So Coinbase allowing this will hopefully get more tokens actually involved in these votes. On the flip side, we're not sure exactly if Coinbase is going to allow, or how they're going to allow their users to manage these votes and do this, how much on their own they can do. But also, we don't necessarily know with these big institutional holders how they'll want the tokens to move and how they'll want the votes to go, as compared to the usual image we have of crypto holders as, anarchists or whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes and how that moves. But overall, it's a positive thing, because if these coins are supposed to be representative and move in the directions that their holders decide, letting more of their holders actually voice that opinion is probably a good thing as far as their networks are concerned. Maybe they'll regret that in the long run, but I think it's great that Coinbase is allowing these features to its institutional users, and hopefully they'll expand that to the retail market soon. I would like to see that, because then more mom and pop people who maybe are nervous about how to vote with their Tezos on their local wallet can maybe use Coinbase for that.
And a lot of people are talking about, like, how do we incentivize voting? Because, I mean, even in just general elections in the United States, outside of the crypto world, getting people to actually leave and go out and have a say and thinking that their vote counts, it's a big undertaking. And I think that you have the same sorts of problems when you're in crypto, when a lot of the network depends on people having a say. And then when you had the recent changes with MakerDAO, with the DAI, and wondering about whether they'll increase fees, how much they're going to. They had these votes. They had a lot of votes about this, and they had trouble incentivizing people to actually vote in the network, and it wasn't a huge turnout of people who did vote there. So I think there's an issue that people are dealing with, like, how do we actually mobilize people? And Coinbase could be a kind of solution with this, if they're actually helping this process, if they're helping institutional players in particular with this voting process. That could be a way to get more people involved.
And there are two sides of that too, because we don't want 100% voter turnout, because not everybody is going to be educated enough on every issue to have an opinion worth voting. So, targeting 100% is not necessarily the ideal way to do things, but making it so 100% are able to, I think, is the ideal here. And Coinbase is moving towards that, which, whatever we may feel about Coinbase elsewhere, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move on. I want to talk about IMF, the World Bank launching educational blockchain tokens. Now, we chatted a little bit about IMF in very unfavorable terms last week. It's not going to change much. I'm not a big fan. And, particularly talking about the relationship with Julian Assange and the billions of dollars that were paid to Ecuador in the form of a loan. And it just happened to coincide with Ecuador handing over Julian Assange to British authorities. So there's a tremendous amount of corruption when you start dealing with central banks, in particular with like world organizations that deal with money. And now it looks like IMF has a history of being very anti blockchain in a lot of ways. Now, for example, we've talked on the show before, like last year, Marshall Islands started looking into using crypto, and they're still doing that, but they got lots of threats from IMF that were very thinly veiled threats, where they're saying, oh, you can go into the crypto world, but, places like the US may not want to trade with you anymore. You may not be eligible for any sort of loan in future. Like, there were a lot of kind of leverage points that were pressed when Marshall Islands started to look into that. So the IMF really has been discouraging this and speaking out about volatility, and this isn't necessarily something to be trusted. But now they're entering the crypto world. Surprise, surprise. Not that this happens every single time. So they have launched a crypto token coin called Learning Coin to better understand how blockchain technology works. What do you think about this, Chris?
Well, since we're going to talk about a massive governmental organization, I need to change my background.
I love that. Bring in the flag.
Yes. But it's interesting how the IMF is doing this. It's their learning coin. They're going to use it for, internal incentives. Where it goes from there, who knows? Basically, so much with IMF.
Where do you start?
I wanted to tie in something we talked about earlier, and then I suddenly just blanked on it, and now I'm just rambling like an idiot.
That's all right. It's all right. We're allowed to do that on the show. So, one of the most interesting things about the IMF, they wield a huge amount of power, and they're so opaque. No one knows anything about them. No one realizes how much control they have. And so when they make pronouncements against crypto, but then they start to enter the crypto space, you've got to wonder what's going on there, right?
From our perspective, we see it as inevitable. They have to keep up with the times. They can't get left behind. Otherwise, a lot of bad stuff will happen to them. And they'll be irrelevant, because we're going to talk a little bit later about some other areas that are in the international finance area that I think is directly related to this. But we talked last week about how the head of the IMF was saying that blockchain is disrupting things. We need to slow things down, make sure there's regulation to stabilize things so we can have, trust in everything. And what she really means is controllability. They don't want to lose control. Because if they do lose control, a lot of chaos could happen, because, the financial networks and the whole worldwide financial system is a house of cards. So we're just waiting for something to fall over, and that's what would happen if they lost control in large areas. And the IMF really is trying to make sure they're staying on top of this and learning. Again, I don't know really how much they're going to be learning with this, what really they're going to do. It's one of those kind of weird things and weird ways of putting it. But again, it's inevitable. It's a sign of the inevitability that blockchain and cryptocurrency are here to stay, and in some form will be taking over the global financial industry. And there's going to be some very interesting movement, I think, in some of the crypto areas of crypto finances, where we're likely to see smart contracts or blockchains taking over some of the basic financial functions that people are used to from getting from their banks. And I like to see things like SALT take off with peer-to-peer lending or other crypto and blockchain-based banking things, so that banks will stop being the beast that they are now and hopefully return to some form of sane and sensibleness.
We can dream, can't we? That's what the Bitcoin dream is all about. And the IMF, they've talked about how crypto is shaking the financial sector. And it does seem that they are worried. I think you're spot on when you say that they are noticing that they may be losing their stronghold. And I think that absolutely that is what they're getting a sense of. Now, these organizations are entrenched, they have a lot of power, they have a lot of staying power. So I don't think these are systems that are going to topple overnight, but I do think that they are going to have to morph and change the way they operate. Otherwise, they will become irrelevant. And yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that these organizations are irrelevant and they don't affect us and we shouldn't even be paying attention to it when we're dealing with the crypto space, which is far more important. But the fact is that these organizations have a huge amount of influence over like monetary policy across the globe, all kinds of different economic policies. And so I think it's important just to kind of keep track of what's going on there.
I mean, they throw around billions and billions of dollars. I mean, the crypto market in its entirety right now is still so tiny compared to what the World Bank and the IMF and all these giant international organizations do, that, they have huge control over even, what gets developed in developing nations. They decide whether development projects in these nations are worth funding or not. They decide how things can actually move forward. And they like to pretend they're just being good stewards or whatever, but the reality of it is it's all, who's patting whose back and whose pockets are in whose pants. Wow, a horrible way to say that. Who's
but we get what you mean.
Sleep last night. I'm just losing it today, so this is going to be entertaining. But they just have a huge influence on the world stage. So as they slowly lose control, and again, I'm excited about talking about some bits related to this later, that this will drastically affect how nations are able to independently control themselves, and hopefully even at the national level for these developing nations increase the decentralization of power and reduce this central power. And I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the Yang Gang. We have presidential candidate Andrew Yang. He's calling for clear guidelines in the crypto world, something that we've been calling for a long time, but then Andrew Yang says it and everyone's like, yay, a presidential candidate who gets it. Does he really get it, Chris? Let's talk a little bit about that, because I am seeing an overwhelming amount of support for Andrew Yang in the crypto space. I don't get it because I think he's economically illiterate. Really not a big fan. Although I do like statements like this from him where he's talking about, we need clarity, because obviously that's the only way that businesses can operate, if they understand what the rules are, so that they feel that they're not going to build up a business and then be retroactively persecuted by SEC, FinCEN, etc. So what are your thoughts on all of this?
I could talk about Yang for a little bit. To be positive,
I thought that you were about to say something like, I could talk about Yang for a little bit, or I could poke my eyes out. Either would be equally enjoyable. I totally get that.
I'm really appalled at the popularity he has in the crypto space now. On the positive side, he's a technocrat. He does seem like someone who genuinely believes his ideas. On the downside, his ideas are shit, and genuinely believing in them doesn't make them less so. And he wants clarity.
You rarely swear on my show, Chris. You rarely swear, and you just said shit on my show. So you must feel very passionate about this, as I think everyone should, because... Sorry, go ahead.
He's just... his ideas will ruin our economy. They'll ruin the nation and drastically affect the entire world. It will hurt a lot of people. His ideas will hurt a lot of people in the long run. They will accelerate the demise. If I was a full-on collapsitarian, I might cheer on his election. Do
you think that's like where a lot of people are coming from? That they're just looking at this and saying like, oh, what will bring on the apocalypse faster? Because, when the apocalypse happens, that's when crypto will thrive. Do you think that's the mindset? Because I think that's... I don't know if I support that. I think that we can find a way to live more free lives with cryptocurrency while the old world persists and we just choose not to be involved with it. And so seeing the old world get even worse with people like Yang doesn't seem like the ideal scenario to me.
Yeah. But, and we have to be careful when we talk about this too, because we all love the idea of additional clarity, but he wants more than just clarity. He wants legislation and guidelines. He wants rules about this. He wants them to issue clear rules for us to follow. And I don't think that the rules that they will issue or the rules that he wants are rules that we would agree with.
Yeah, and he's not saying that we want clarity so that, you know, people can thrive. This is what he says. Cryptocurrency and digital asset markets have developed faster than regulations can keep up. Several states have conflicting and varying regulations on digital asset markets. Uncertainty in what regulatory framework will develop is causing US investment in the area to lag behind the investment of other countries. So he talks a little bit about investment, but he's talking about the fact that this space is moving faster than regulation can keep up, suggesting that, oh, here's the space. Guys, it's unregulated. Let's catch up and make sure that we have everything in order and controlled and have lots of rules. So he says it's time for the federal government to create clear guidelines as to how cryptocurrencies and digital asset markets will be treated and regulated so the investment can proceed with all relevant information. I mean, I agree with that. I think that everything, like most businesses, they have to operate in the real world. They have to operate with regulations and abiding by the law. They'll be thrown in jail if they don't. So if you want businesses to feel comfortable investing money in infrastructure, anything like that, then they have to understand what these rules are. So I agree with him there, but you're right. I mean, knowing about Yang's other policies, I would also suspect that he just wants this to become another regulated area of the economy.
Yeah, I mean, business people need stability in rules. I mean, for a lot of the business people, they care to an extent, but they would rather the rules be stable than they're changing every 5 minutes, even if maybe one of the changes makes life better for them. Because having to deal with those changing rules all the time is very, very difficult. So, I mean, he was a businessman. That's his perspective here, and I understand that perspective. And as somebody who's just trying to get along, yeah, we don't really care what you do here. Just make it clear so we can move forward. It's the unclarity that makes things so difficult. But at the same time, Andrew Yang wants a social credit system in the United States, the same as we have in China. I don't think he has freedom in mind when he's talking about regulation and guidelines.
No, his track record with the types of policies that he's after, they're very authoritarian, they're very nanny states, they're very much encouraging more government overreach. So he is definitely not my candidate. I find it amusing seeing all these memes on the internet, but we must be careful not to give too much attention to some of these more fun candidates, because sometimes they get in power and don't necessarily do good things. So maybe he just doesn't deserve our attention, but everyone could be left to decide that on their own. I'm not sure that the voting system is something that is conducive to creating a great society, as history has shown. So maybe the whole thing doesn't matter at all. I don't know. Maybe we'll do an episode on that where we'll talk about that in length. Chris, what do you say?
That would be great. I mean, I would be excited to talk about all sorts of things in that area. So yeah, we should do that.
And I'm thinking of doing another series. Oh, just to let everyone know. So I launched a new series with Bruce Fenton today, and it is called CypherStreet. Sort of the idea that previously we had Wall Street and it was very corrupt and bad and all of that, and this is sort of coming in and replacing all of those traditional like financial things with something with a more cypherpunk mentality. So CypherStreet, you guys can be checking out videos about that. I've already released them on the CypherStreet channel, but I'll also be releasing them on mine as well. But that being said, back to politics, I'm thinking of doing another segment for my channel where, I don't know, I like rebrand myself as Secession Girl or something rather than Bitcoin Girl with the political climate, because I just think that we need to encourage people not to try to force others under like their blanket rules and say, well, 50% of the population disagrees with 50% of the population. Let's have a blanket rule where everyone must abide by the same things and under the same rules that they vehemently disagree with. So I like to encourage the idea of secession. Maybe you could just go your separate ways. Maybe, we don't have to have these fights all the time. People could just, learn to govern themselves or create groups where they have, sorry, I'm just hitting my microphone there. Where people can create rules that apply best for them. Perhaps people at the federal level don't necessarily know the best interests of people at the local level. So that's something I'm playing with. Secession, a secession themed show. But let me know if you have any ideas there.
We could do nullification.
No, yeah, exactly. There are lots of things we can go down. So I'll keep you posted on how that goes. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about some of these traditional financial tools. So we're looking into. I've talked a little bit about stable coins on the show before, and we've talked a lot about treasury bonds. We've talked about interest rates. We've talked about all kinds of things that exist in traditional finance. And what we're seeing right now is the blockchain space melding with that traditional world. So a couple of instances of that at the moment, which are pretty interesting. So startup Arca, they're seeking SEC approval for a treasury bond backed stablecoin, which is interesting. And then the other thing I want to talk about is how Afghanistan and Tunisia are issuing sovereign bonds in Bitcoin. And that in particular is interesting. And Chris, do you want to start us off and explain why?
Well, I was very interested in reading about Afghanistan and Tunisia to issue these sovereign bonds in Bitcoin. One of my problems here, and I'll just start right off, is I'm not really sure how the mechanics of this will work. I don't know enough about what this means. There are other people who are far more knowledgeable about this than I am. But I thought this was very interesting, and I'm trying to dig more into it, but I just don't know really exactly the mechanism here and how it will affect the Bitcoin markets, or how it might affect the Bitcoin markets. Nobody knows how it will affect them. But one of the ties in here to the earlier thing is basically because Afghanistan is, well, as we all know, there's a little war that's been going on there as long as some of the listeners might have been alive. And Tunisia is also not a paragon of stability. The IMF has exposed them, the IMF we talked about earlier, to severe restrictions on non-concessional financing. Basically, that makes developed countries less likely to invest in Afghanistan because of its risk, as well as the lack of fiscal stability. So I thought this was very interesting because the Bitcoin bond here, and Afghanistan's trying to tie it to their lithium sector, where Tunisia is probably going to tie it to their cotton sector, where it is Tunisia is the largest cotton producer in the world. And this will allow them to get financing and money inflows in these sectors outside of the control of our friendly neighborhood IMF. So I find this as part of the tying and part of the decentralization of financing, and part of these developing nations and these small cap nations, or whatever you want to call them, to actually get funding away and outside of traditional systems, which I think is great and an unabashedly good thing in my mind.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of, and we've seen this before. We've seen this, like Venezuela has tried to do this, and the SEC, or the government is accusing Russia of doing the same thing. Now that we have these tools, this permissionless money, people are finding it easier not to have to follow orders from particular countries anymore. And I mean, as we know, America really does have a lot of leverage in world politics, and they can enforce a lot of rules that are in their interest just by controlling money supply and having US dollar as the primary currency of the world. So I think that now that people have alternatives, and you have countries like Germany who's thinking of not having the US dollar as this primary center point of the global economy anymore. You have the Middle East saying the same thing. Then you have certain countries like this that are actually implementing and using cryptocurrency literally as a way to circumvent certain regulations. I think that this is going to create an interesting scenario where the will of one country can no longer supersede that of maybe smaller countries.
That is a big hope I have. I mean, if you remember, over the years, the federal government first started really flexing its muscles financially against the states. Like, one thing people always forget now is there's no federal law about the drinking age being 21. It's just the federal government said to the states, make the drinking age 21 in your states, otherwise we're going to pull all our highway funds from you. So, and that's how we're treating all these other nations, and through the IMF and through all these international banks, we're doing the same thing, if indirectly. So this is how the U.S. is flexing their muscles and controlling all of these other countries by being the reserve currency. That was part of our deal with Saudi Arabia to only sell gold for dollars, 70 years ago now. Only sell oil for dollars, rather, 70 years ago now. So this is all ties in with that. And on the international stage, some of these cryptocurrencies are going to really help, I think. I mean, that's why the IMF is encouraging central banks to study cryptocurrencies themselves, because we're going to see more and more central banks issuing their own digital currencies to try to combat this. And it's our job to encourage the use of free market digital currencies, which is why I love that Afghanistan and Tunisia are trying to tie into Bitcoin instead of spinning up their own currency like Venezuela did.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about the emergence of IBM Blockchain becoming more prominent. And we're seeing a lot of people looking into supply chains and using blockchain technology as a way of tracking supply chains. And you've got Volkswagen that are tracking mineral supply chains using IBM blockchain. And you have Nestle and Carrefour who's teaming up to feed consumer data with IBM blockchain. So it is interesting to see this sort of on the periphery while we're talking about like BSV and the exchanges and stable coins that are attached to bonds and treasury bonds. And then on the periphery, you've kind of got this external use case that is being explored at the moment, which seems pretty interesting.
Well, and a few things. We were talking about securities recently, and CypherStreet, and securities are one of those. Yeah, that's one of the easiest uses for tokens, one of the most obvious uses for tokens, because it's a direct analog between things like stocks and tokens. It's very easy tie over, very easy for everybody to understand. Supply chains are another thing that people find very easy to conceptually understand in the concept of blockchain. It works quite well in certain areas for a blockchain to come by, and for compliance reasons, blockchains can help, because it's very easy to prove cryptographically that something was somewhere, or so long as you have the Oracle situation taken care of. So, and we understand IBM also has a deal with XLM, Stellar, to help with international money transfers, and I'm not sure how much their blockchain themselves is related to Stellar. They say it's built using Hyperledger, so that's a bit different and not necessarily the same thing as the cryptos we're used to. But overall, I mean, where it can fit into these spaces is good, and the more spaces like that it fits into that people see, the less strange that money is built on it to the average person. It'll be more understandable as a currency when it's also built into these other things, more trustworthy as a currency as well. Because the more it's used and stable in all these other uses, the less people will fear in the context of currency.
And I think that a lot of the time, I mean, like we kind of look at things like HTTPS, which is just the go-to standard when we search on the web these days, but no one really thinks about it, right? The average user isn't understanding it more or feeling more comfortable with it. It's just become more pervasive, and that's really what we're probably going to see with blockchain. Isn't people like suddenly becoming more educated about this and like, oh, I get blockchain now because Carrefour is using it, and I feel more comfortable with it. It could also be that just more companies, so that rather than the consumer side, more companies start to look into this and start to see how this technology could help their industry. So once that happens, it just becomes this pervasive thing that happens under the hood that the average person isn't aware of, but businesses are using to their advantage.
Exactly, and it'll just become second nature. I mean, the lettuce you're buying has been tracked on the blockchain from the field in Mexico, and the Bitcoin you're using to buy it is being tracked on the blockchain throughout its entire history. It's just sensible. It makes sense to the average person, I hope.
Lettuce on the blockchain. I love it. Wasn't there like lettuce coin? That was one of my favorite shit coins that was out.
I'm pretty sure there was, yeah.
It's now we've gone full circle. Yes, lettuce being tracked on the blockchain is a good idea. Meanwhile, the people at lettuce coins are like, you called us a scam. This is bad. But really, I mean, it seems like it was kind of a shit coin, even though it's being used for supply chains now, which is kind of a different thing. I want to give a shout out because I just received a power chat from JR from Exciting World Cryptos. He has an awesome YouTube show. If you don't watch that, he has probably the best backgrounds in crypto, apart from obviously Zafoy's background, which is an awesome flag in all the right colors. But JR just films his stuff in awesome locations where you have just like snow as far as you can see, like beautiful forests and all kinds of things. So go check that out. But he sent $4 in SmartCash. Thank you so much for that, JR. And he says, don't let others write the rules of your life. If you obey all the rules, you'll miss all the fun. taking the roads less traveled and less recommended is the only route to change and self-leadership. Thank you very much, JR. I really appreciate you saying that. It's always a good lesson to remind people. So let's move on. I want to talk now about FinCEN. So they have, for the first time, penalized a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchanger for breaking anti-money laundering rules. This is interesting that this is like the first time this has started. It happened to a resident of California, Eric Powers, who apparently failed to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act's registration and reporting requirements during 2012 to 2014. So we're talking about an era where it really, I mean, right now, if you think of this as the Wild West of crypto, 2012 to 2014 was just crazy. No one you knew was involved in crypto. This was like the fringe of society dealing with this, when no one knew what the rules were, no one knew whether this was being treated as currency, no one knew whether this was being treated as a commodity. And now FinCEN is saying you failed to comply with these laws that never existed because you didn't know how to qualify cryptocurrency back then. So I think that this is insane what's happening right now.
Well, it's frightening for a couple of reasons. One, this was 5 years ago. So all of us who have been in crypto that long are now going, crap, stuff we did back then might still come around to bite us. We're not free and clear.
Yeah.
All stuff that might be happening from back then. That could, so that's not great. That's not an awesome feeling. But also, if you look at this a different way, it's kind of interesting. One, it's very impressive that he managed to trade 160 transactions of Bitcoin worth about 5 million. I'm assuming 5 million at the time, because if it's 5 million now, that'd be completely different thing.
Yeah, then it would have been like, you traded $2.50 back then. Shame on you. Yeah.
But 5 million in Bitcoin in 2012, that's an impressively large amount of Bitcoin. And he was fined because he was accepting more than $10,000 in cash for it, but did not file a single currency transaction report. Oh no! Sorry. But
thank you, government, for protecting us.
Yeah, but the other interesting thing here is he was fined $35,000 and barred from providing money transmission services. So now, mind you, this was stuff that happened between 2012 and 2014, and it was 2014 that FinCEN ruled this. So maybe some of these took place before the ruling even happened, and maybe that's why the fine is so low, or not. I mean, it's one of those things that it's very hard to say, and it's not, unfortunately, it's not clarified.
I mean,
what was the stuff you did that will be caught under this, and what won't be?
I mean, the fact that we just had Yang saying, hey, can we get some clarity in 2019 about regulations around crypto? And they're talking about 2012 and saying that, you know, there were these rules and you didn't comply. I mean, who knows what the rules are? There has been such a severe lack of clarity with all of these things. And I mean, it says here that that Powers apparently was specifically aware of the obligations but willfully failed to honor them, and it also says that he failed to file a suspicious activity report when doing business apparently related to Silk Road. Keep in mind that in 2012 everyone involved in Bitcoin was probably also involved in Silk Road. I mean, that was really early on, when a large part of the crypto movement was fueled by this dark marketplace, Silk Road, which popularized Bitcoin. It proved that, you know, crypto could work in transactions and in a marketplace. And so it's just really interesting, like, out of context. I mean, you have an article like this that says, Silk Road, money laundering, willfully ignored rules or regulations. But if you're actually taking us back to the context of the time, it's just, I mean, I think that right now, looking at an article like this, it takes it completely out of proportion of what actually happened back then. But you're right, it is a very significant amount of crypto that they traded. So hats off to them.
Yep, and I'm glad he's not in prison. I'm glad he managed to stay out of prison. And I'm not sure what he does for a living. I'm not sure who he is, but he's not allowed to provide money transmission services in the future. So too bad you can't do that.
Yeah.
But I found it, I don't know, just very interesting, because Last year, they did say that money transmitter rules apply even to those who conducted ICOs. So they're just, again, these rules, I mean, these rules, people fall afoul of these rules when they're depositing $9,000 at a time in their bank, and then the IRS will come and take all their money. But that's just because that's how much money they made. But no, you're structuring deposits to avoid the $10,000 mark, so you don't have to fill out the form. So this is something that's used to terrorize small business owners and individuals. This is not something that really helps anybody. This is just government terrorism of the average citizen.
I mean, if you're looking at what they're asking, they're saying that Powers did not register himself as a money transmitter or as a money services business. So keeping in mind that at the time, you know, crypto people, it wasn't clear that they needed to do that in 2012, that they were going to be considered money transmitters. You know, it's still not clear to what extent, like depending on what kind of tokens you're selling as opposed to currency, like, and the SEC hasn't provided any clarity about what they consider securities versus currency. You know, it's all very opaque there. But I think that talking about registering as a money transmitter, that's a huge hurdle. Now, there used to be this thing called the Satoshi Square meetup, and anyone who's around in early days know that that's where you went to buy cryptocurrency, because an online exchange, I mean, you had to trust them. It's early days. It's hard to know who's reputable, who's not. I mean, Mt. Gox was reputable, right? That was an exchange that people sent money to, and that was a giant fiasco. And so a lot of the times you had these meetups where people would go in person, and they were regular and people knew about them, but it was also kind of under the hood a little bit. Like, they didn't want to be too public, the fact that these meetups were going on, and people would face to face exchange money. Now, it seems like this could be what this kind of guy is doing. Maybe he was someone who was just a regular at a Satoshi Square meetup and who was exchanging money because it's the only way that new people could really enter the space in crypto. And it just seems so crazy that the government is trying to force on individuals this label of you're a money transmitter because you did a peer-to-peer transaction. So like exchanging something with a family or friend, you know, like if I lend my sister $5, am I a money transmitter because I passed on money? Like, it just is very unclear, like, to what extent these rules apply. So I mean, the whole point of Bitcoin is to try and circumvent this, and it just seems that the government is making this like a big test case, saying, here's an individual, we're cracking down on that individual. Yes, it is from the early days. We're coming after you if you're someone who thinks that you can evade the long arm of the law and be exchanging peer-to-peer with someone and get out of our reach. Like, it seems that they are trying to scare people out of doing this sort of thing and really using Bitcoin for what it's made for, which is peer-to-peer transactions.
But, you know, sure, the FinCEN will come after you if you don't treat Bitcoin like money. The IRS will come after you if you do treat Bitcoin like money. According to the IRS, it's a commodity. So it's not like it's the government coming after you about this in one particular way. It's the government disagreeing with itself and putting you in a no-win situation where you have to follow sometimes contradictory regulations.
It's yeah, it just makes me so sad. It makes me so sad. Let's move on there, Chris. So let's talk a little bit, just as we're wrapping up here, let's talk a little bit about the market. Let's talk a little bit about fees. So Bitcoin fees have jumped again to like year-long highs. People are wondering why this is. Obviously, it's the same old debate that we've been having. The fees are going to hike when you have blocks being filled and people are competing for space in those, and so that's why things like Bitcoin Cash and all these other coins were sort of created as an alternative there, and then that's why Lightning on the other side of things is also created to encourage people to go off chain. So do you want to talk a little bit about fees and what we're looking at right now?
Well, what we're looking at right now is there are more transactions on the network than anytime since basically last April. I mean, we are upsurging an actual movement of Bitcoin for whatever reason. It's not necessarily usage, but for whatever reason, it is corresponding with higher exchange volume, and we can assume that some of it's real. I don't know. Again, everything has caveats these days. But the fees basically means that the blocks are full, so people are spending more and more in fees to get their transactions through quicker. This is one of the natural weaknesses of Bitcoin itself, where it becomes unusable as it becomes more popular. Lightning was created to protect us from this somewhat, to offload everyday transactions onto side chains. But I worked this out, but if every individual in the United States wanted to open one single Lightning channel, I mean, that would take, years, literally years for that to happen. At 7 transactions or even 20 transactions per second, it takes a long time for 20 transactions to get up to 300 million people. So it's not really functional the way it is. But at the same time, most of the people, especially the people working on the Lightning Network, are quite happy with a full mempool and high fees, because it makes their Lightning Network more attractive to use. Whereas the Bitcoin Cash people, and yes, the Bitcoin SV people, are going, why are you crippling the core network? Why don't you just grow the block sizes so people can keep using it? Because it's not a very effective medium of exchange if you can't exchange it.
That is the age-old debate right there, isn't it?
A good store of value. Yeah, yes, it's an age-old debate, blah, blah, blah. I don't need to go too deep into that, but basically what we're seeing as related to the market is probably a good thing. It means that more people are using it, more people are moving it. Probably means that more people think we're near the bottom of the markets. Whether that's true or not, the gods of the market only know. See where the animal spirits lead us next. But
the animal spirits.
to quote my favorite Krugman quote, come on. But overall, I mean, it shows a bit of the weakness of Bitcoin, which is, again, why coins like mine, like SmartCash, exist, to answer some of those weaknesses as a medium of exchange. But also it shows more usage in the crypto space. And I think we're seeing a lot of the more used cryptocurrencies increasing in their transaction volume, not just Bitcoin. So that's a good thing. I want cryptocurrency to be used. So more transactions means it's actually being used. I think this is a good thing.
Yeah, I do want to just point out a little thing that Jose Ortega has said in the live chat. Just referring to what we were saying before about all of the regulation and everything. He says we should go back to calling it fake internet money, just to use amongst ourselves and avoid the banks altogether, to avoid confusion. I really like that. What if we did just go back to calling it fake internet money or magical internet money? I mean, that could be a way for people, like if we are able to laugh at ourselves enough and kind of lower the perception of the value of this enough that maybe the government just leaves us alone. And that's sort of what Satoshi was saying at the start, right? About how Bitcoin needs to grow very slowly, and he didn't want WikiLeaks to come on board. He thought that this would just be a flood of people and Bitcoin wouldn't be able to cope, and it would just lead to Bitcoin just being getting too much exposure too soon. And I mean, it could be that that's what's happening, that Bitcoin got really, really popular and now everyone's trying to regulate it out of existence, and it's before we really have the right privacy tools to be using it safely, the right decentralized tools so that there aren't focal points to be targeted by governments and institutional players. So it's an interesting scenario there. The popularity of Bitcoin may be its demise in this sense. I mean, I don't think it is. I think that Bitcoin is going to continue to be strong, and there are lots of alternative currencies that do have privacy features that people can go to, but it is interesting to think about.
Well, I think that if you wait until you're ready, you're never going to do anything. And that's how crypto and Bitcoin is. It's going to be a continued messy growth because the adoption is going to outpace the utility and functionality because people will get excited. And that's just how it's going to be. It's going to be a bumpy ride on the way up, but it is going to go up. So I'm quite positive about that. I'm quite positive that our magic internet money will be more magical than anybody imagines right now.
Yeah. So I do want to talk again, because we talked a little bit about fees, and then on the other side of things, you've got apparently an analyst at UBS who's saying that Bitcoin has bottomed out, but it may take 20 years to reach its mid-December 2017 all-time highs. So when it was getting up to like 20 grand, it could take 20 years to get back there. What are your thoughts on that, Chris? I think that sounds far too long, but I never make price predictions because no one knows. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I mean, 20 years would be, what, 4 more happenings? I don't think that's going to be how that works at all. But, you know, the way he's relating it to is kind of like related to the dot-com bubble, where a lot of the big dot-com stocks dropped a whole bunch in 2000. I mean, Amazon, you know, dropped way more percentage-wise than Bitcoin did. And yet it's come up to rule the world basically now. But again, that's basically 20 years since that, and I think that's somewhat what he's relating it to now. And it's going to be an interesting ride up. I don't think it's going to take 22 years for an all-time high. But basically, he's saying, oh, it takes a whole bunch of time for assets to recover their peak levels. And because it's taken as long as 22 years for the Dow Jones in the past.
So and he's judging this.
How pedestrian. What was that?
I was just going to say, so he's basing this on antiquated, you know, indexes that no one really respects. I mean, who looks at the Dow Jones? If you're going to look at anything in traditional finance, you look at the S&P. Like, the Dow Jones is like this relic that isn't a good gauge of anything. And he's basing his assessment on like how the Dow works. It's kind of interesting. And I mean, what you'd expect of someone who works in traditional finance.
Yeah, and if you look at the last several drops, the days to the all-time high, if you look at November 2011, it took 461 days to get back to that high, and then the drop in August 2012 that lasted 3 days. It took 114 days to get to the previous high. Then April 2013, it took 210 days. Then the December 2013 to January 2015, it took 771 days to get to the previous high. So he's seeing that it's getting longer and longer and longer to go to the previous all-time high. So, you know, if it went from 210 days to 771 days, this one might take, 2,000 days or 22 years apparently. Which again, I don't see that Bitcoin is the crypto market in general is anywhere near that level of maturity to take that long to do. We have several more up and down cycles before we smooth out anywhere near that. And we're going to be much higher when we do.
Indeed.
But I don't work for a giant bank like UBS. I'm just a tech guy. I am not a money guy with 40 years of experience. I could be completely off my rocker on this and high on my own supply here. But
higher on your own supply of Bitcoin. It is interesting because you have people in traditional finance making predictions about this, but you have a lot of people who don't really understand how crypto works. But then you have people in crypto who are saying like, hey guys, this is an entirely new paradigm. Don't necessarily judge it based on existing models because things are changing very, very fast. And I think it just goes to show like it's very hard to make predictions in this space. And it is, as I said, I never do it. I never do it at all. But long term, I'm bullish. It's interesting that they did say that it will get back there, but it's going to take 20 years. It seems that they're long term bullish as well. It's just, price predictions are hard.
I mean, and in 22 years, who knows what the dollar itself will be worth? I mean, they're assuming a whole bunch of things with that. And I would not rely on the dollar being stable or anywhere near its current value 22 years from now.
Exactly. So we've run out of time on the show today. I do want to let people know, so I am on DLive now, although today it wasn't working. So I've actually tweeted at DLive to say, hey guys, I'm trying to use this thing, it's not working. So we'll see what they have to say. But the thing is that in order to start uploading my videos on DLive as well, I apparently need 200 followers. So if anyone is on DLive and hasn't followed me yet, I would be so grateful if you give me a follow over there, because then I can start using it as an alternative platform to YouTube. And I would very much like to support people in the blockchain space with my videos. So yeah, that would be awesome. I just added the link there if people want to follow me there. And if you are on there, let me know so that I can follow you back there as well. But yeah, we've run out of time here on the show. Chris, as always, thank you so much for being here and for chatting with me and spending this wonderful Friday afternoon.
Well, thanks very much for having me, even though I got repeatedly tongue-tied early on.
Tongue-tied. What's the song? The Don't Leave Me Tongue-Tied. Dollars, you know that? And no
Nope,
one?
no clue what
Okay.
you're talking about.
All right, never mind. I'll post the song later in my Telegram group so you'll know. Okay, so it's happy Easter. This is Easter weekend. If you're doing something fun, let me know what it is. Happy Passover, if that's a thing you're doing. A lot of people going to like Cedars tonight. That should be fun. There's like a full moon tonight, so maybe you're a pagan and you're out there like doing some moon dances. It's like a pink moon as well, so that seems kind of cool. So whatever you're doing this weekend, I hope that you have a wonderful time and you enjoy yourselves. And as always, thank you so much to everyone who has been in the chat with me. I really appreciate that. You guys are so awesome. And also huge thank you to JR for the power chat in SmartCash on Bitbacker. I really appreciate that as well. Go check out JR's channel. He's always a big supporter of my show. I really appreciate that. And go head over to CypherStreet, the new channel that Bruce Fenton and I are setting up. And have a wonderful time, guys. I'll chat to you later.
Adios.
Adios, everyone. Happy Friday.